Have you ever heard of a boy who couldn't walk but was destined to become the founder of one of the greatest empires in African history? This is the beginning of the legend of Sundiata Keita, the Lion King of Mali. In the 13th century, long before borders and nations as we know them today, the savannas of West Africa were home to powerful kingdoms. One of them was the Kingdom of Mali, ruled by a wise and respected king named Magan Konfata. One day, a group of hunters arrived at his court with a mysterious woman. Her name was Sogolon, and she was unlike anyone the people had ever seen. She walked with a hunch, had long unkempt hair, and a quiet presence that made others uneasy. But the hunters brought a prophecy with them. The king must marry this strange woman, because she would give birth to a son who would one day become a great ruler. Despite his doubts, the king obeyed. Sogolon became his wife, and not long after, she gave birth to a boy named Sundiata, but there was a problem. Sundiata did not speak, he did not crawl. And as the years passed, he still could not walk, the court whispered. His stepmother, Sasuma Berit, who had a son of her own, mocked Sogolon and her child. How could this boy, weak and silent, ever become a king? But Sogolon remained patient. She believed in the prophecy. And more than anything, she believed in her son. Sundiata, though silent and still, watched everything. He listened, he learned. The world thought he was broken, but inside, something powerful was growing. Meanwhile, in the palace, tension grew. Sasuma Berit, afraid for her own son's claim to the throne, began to plot. With the king aging and weak, she whispered in ears, sowing doubt about Sundiata. Eventually, when Magan Konfata passed away, Sasuma used her influence to place her own son on the throne, pushing Sogolon and Sundiata into the shadows. They were no longer welcome in the court. Humiliated and isolated, Sogolon suffered quietly. But her love for her son never faded. One day, she could no longer bear the shame. She cried in front of Sundiata. And for the first time, the boy who had never walked stood up. In that moment, something ancient awakened. Sundiata asked for a sturdy iron rod. With effort, he pulled himself to his feet. His legs trembled, but he did not fall. He took one step, then another. And then, to the shock of the entire court, he walked. It was not just a boy walking, it was a symbol, a spark, a lion rising. This was only the beginning of Sundiata's journey. Cast out from his home and forced into exile, the boy who once could not move would go on to build one of the most legendary empires in African history. What do you do when your destiny is denied and your homeland turns against you? For Sundiata Keita, exile became his path to greatness. After Sundiata stood for the first time, the people of Mali were stunned. The boy once seen as weak had proven his strength before the entire court. But his stepmother, Sasuma Berit, saw this as a threat. Her own son now wore the crown, but the prophecy still lingered in people's minds. Driven by fear, she convinced the court to send Sundiata, his mother Sogolon, and his siblings away. Their exile began not with a chase, but with quiet rejection. They wandered through different kingdoms. Sogolon carried the pain of being cast out, but her belief in her son never wavered. And Sundiata, growing older and stronger, absorbed the lessons around him. He trained with warriors, studied with wise men, listened to griots who told stories of past kings and broken empires. He learned what it meant to lead, to suffer, to wait, and above all, to rise. Far away, Mali began to crumble. A powerful and feared ruler named Sumoro Kanti had risen in the north. He was not an ordinary king. Stories spread that he had magical powers, that he could vanish into stone, speak to spirits, and summon destruction with a glance. People called him the Sorcerer King. He conquered city after city. He enslaved leaders, he burned traditions, and finally he took Mali. The people were terrified, but not silent. In whispered conversations around dying fires, they spoke of a boy who had been born to change everything. A boy who could not walk but would one day rule. They remembered Sundiata. When the last hope was gone, envoys were sent to find him. They crossed dangerous lands, searching for the exiled prince. When they finally found him, they begged him to return and save his people. And Sundiata, calm and determined, agreed. He had not forgotten his home, he had only been waiting. But one man could not defeat a sorcerer. Sundiata knew he needed an army. Not just of soldiers, but of belief, of memory, of unity. So he traveled again, not to escape but to gather. He visited once rival tribes and told them a new story. A future they could fight for, a Mali reborn, where no king ruled by fear. And the people listened, warriors joined, hunters pledged allegiance. Griots came with their drums and their voices. He reunited with his old griot Balafasik, who reminded him of who he was and who he was meant to become. Together they marched. The child who once sat in silence now led thousands. The people no longer saw weakness in him, they saw fire, and they followed. But Sumoro's magic was no myth. His power was real, his cruelty unmatched. And just when it seemed that no one could stop him, Sundiata uncovered something. A secret, a hidden truth that could turn the tide of battle. What if the greatest weapon against darkness was not strength or magic but memory itself? The final chapter of Sundiata Keita's journey shows how wisdom and unity can overcome even the most feared power. As Sundiata prepared for the final battle, his army grew stronger. Warriors from many regions, skilled hunters, loyal griots, and even rival leaders stood together under his leadership. The boy who once could not walk was now leading thousands. But ahead of him stood Sumoro County, the sorcerer king of Soso. Legend said he could vanish into walls, control spirits, and never be defeated. Sundiata knew force alone would not be enough. He listened closely to griots and to a hunter who had once escaped from Sumoro's palace. From their stories, he discovered a secret. Sumoro's magic came from a hidden object known as a fetish, made from rare materials with mystical energy. If it was destroyed, Sumoro's power would fall with it. The two armies met on the vast plain of Kiruna. The sun beat down on shields and spears. On one side stood Sumoro, cold and silent. On the other, Sundiata, steady and focused. The battle began. Sumoro unleashed his spells, but Sundiata had come prepared. He carried arrows blessed by the hunter's rituals, tipped with sacred materials. He aimed not at the man but at the fetish itself. With one shot, the object was struck. The spell broke. Sumoro felt his strength leave him. He turned and fled into the mountains, his power fading behind him. He was never seen again. With the enemy defeated, Sundiata and his people reclaimed Mali. Cities were freed, villages celebrated, but Sundiata did more than restore a kingdom. He brought together the elders, the wise men, and the storytellers. Together, they created the Mandinka Charter, a code of values and justice that placed honor, family, and dignity above all. Under Sundiata's leadership, Mali grew into one of the richest and most respected empires in the world. Trade routes flourished, culture thrived. Griots carried his story far beyond borders, singing of the boy who rose from silence to greatness. Sundiata Keita passed away as a king but remained alive in legend. Not because of magic or conquest, but because he united a people and gave them back their voice. If this story moved you, leave a comment, share it with someone, and follow the channel for more powerful legends from around the world. Greatness often begins in quiet places, but when it rises, the whole world listens.